Hi everyone, good Wednesday afternoon and welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us for some news and politics. In the latest news, I'm joined by attorney Nick Hemond, representing the Club 7 on Federal Hill that the Providence Board of Licenses had voted to close. Earlier today, the Department of Business Regulation voted to allow it to reopen. Nick Hemond, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So we had spoken after that Board of Licenses decision, and this is pretty much par for the course with a lot that happens at the Board of License level. Now, this, of course, was the club that was involved with the murder up there on Federal Hill, but as pointed out through the proceedings, did not have a nexus to the actual murder. And the Board of Licenses still voted to close it based on bottle service, some entertainment violations, but the business regulations voted to overturn that. Talk with us a little bit. This happens a lot.
Well, sure. Well, first of all, the club was not involved in a murder. Patrons who had been at the club murdered another patron who had been at the club about 500 feet or so down the road from the club in the parking lot of Walgreens. The decisions of the board get overturned almost, I would say, I don't know that I've ever gone to the Department of Business Regulation on a case that wasn't overturned at the Department of Business Regulation, because they apply the law and they follow the law and they have procedures and rules. They conduct a real hearing. It's balanced, it's fair, and you have an opportunity to actually have the facts applied to law that everyone's aware of, and that's why you see these decisions get overturned. And people criticize the Department of Business Regulation for overturning the decisions of the board, but yet none of their decisions have been overturned in Superior Court, because if they're really that unhappy, they can take the decisions to Superior Court. And they don't do that because they know when they make these decisions what the law is, and essentially they punt it to the DBR, and the DBR does its job. Now, I don't agree. I agree that the decision was stayed. The way the process works is a hearing officer who hears all these cases makes a recommendation to the director, and then the director can opt to object, reject it, modify it, or accept it. In this instance, the director modified the decision, and which was basically to give them back everything but a 2 a.m. closing, have them have a police detail, and which was my suggestion, and not allow them to play music, which was again something I offered to agree to.
So what is the closing time now?
And the closing time under this stay order is 11 p.m. She also, the director, imposed some requirements that would require the club to provide security in the lot across the street that it doesn't own, that it at one time did lease. On this night in question, and all the nights going forward, no longer does lease.
Do you think that's overreach?
Yeah, I don't think you can do that. You can't mandate one lessee of one property to go onto someone else's property and provide security. You just can't do that. You can have them provide security outside, certainly. And then they've also sort of deputized their security to police the streets, which I don't think anybody really wants them to do. What would have been reasonable, and then they require a new security plan. Meanwhile, this is an establishment that has no records of fights inside, no records of violence inside, has no record of violence at all. And even now, according to the stay hearing, the department has said that I have a substantial likelihood of success on the merits of my case, because there is no nexus between what happened and what happened in the club. And the board tried to manufacture something, and it didn't work. Now, there was bottle service and there was entertainment without a license, and they've had problems with that. But if you read sort of the decision in the case, they note that we've already essentially served what would have been the appropriate penalty in that case.
So when is the club going to reopen?
I don't believe that this club will reopen, to be honest with you. Before this started, we were started talking about an exit strategy for the owner of this establishment. There have been a number of people interested in both buying the business and the building itself. Even if they had given him everything in the world and dismissed the case, I don't know that this club owner would have reopened in the immediate future. Things could change. He may decide to reopen. But for the present time, even if he wanted to reopen right now, he'd have to staff and stock and all of those things that haven't been done for the past 30 days that he's been closed. So right now, there's no intent to reopen.
Okay, no intent to reopen. You did mention DBR when they had made their decision. You talk about deputizing the security staff. So what did they were looking to hold this particular establishment their security more accountable even outside the club, give them kind of jurisdiction that you don't believe they should necessarily have?
My reading of the decision was essentially that they had to have their security go out into the street and make sure patrons are getting in their cars and going home, but security is not, empowered to do that. And I've represented security companies. I've been an investor in security companies. And if it was my security company, I certainly wouldn't do business in any scenario where that was incumbent upon us. What she could have certainly reasonably required to say is, well, we want new security. We want you to utilize a company. We want you to utilize different people. I think that's something that we've, licensee has agreed to. The board has ordered in the past, and that certainly would have been something that you could do. But again, to order a new security plan has no nexus to anything that happened, because we're talking about what is a bottle service in an entertainment case. And I know of no bottle service violation, third or second offense, that's resulted in a 30-day closure. I know of no second offense entertainment violation that's resulted in an 11 o'clock closure or a 30-day closure or anything along those lines. Usually it's a fine. So as long as the board treats licensees disparatively and treats one way and one another with the same facts, these decisions will be overturned.
So let's talk a little bit holistically. We've spoken after Board of Licenses decisions. Obviously, this was a tragic situation, as you said, with no connection save for those involved having been inside the club for the murder that took place 500 feet away. Federal Hill, there's that big question of how to make it safer. Obviously, your interest is representing the clubs. They have a responsibility. What's going to happen next time something like this happens? I mean, how does the city need to address this from a more holistic level than, again, seeing what happens at the Board of Licenses, goes to the DBR, you've got a business owner that says, you know what, I'm probably going to be out, I'm not going to reopen. How does this get made better?
I just think that in any land use or licensing project, you just always have that sort of not in my backyard. And in Providence, we often have neighborhoods right on top of commercial areas. I've done work in downtown, and people are saying, this is not a commercial area, it's a neighborhood, but you're in downtown Providence. You're always going to have that give and take where people are not going to want late-night establishments in the area that they live in. I do think that there is a conversation to be had with public safety on how do we address the crowds in areas where we know there are 2 a.m. licenses. And it doesn't matter if they're 2 a.m. If everyone get out at 1 o'clock or 12 o'clock, you'd have the same issue. You have very capable people that I have a lot of respect for, and Steve Parry and Hugh Clements and Major Verdi, and Major Perez, Major LePayton. These people are veteran police officers that are extremely capable, and I think a conversation could be had with them to say, what can we do as a city when those closing hours come about to disperse patrons? And I don't think that they would even be in favor of the idea of turning that over to private security, unless it was private security hired by the city. But I think that whether it's, and I know that our police department is low on staffing, but I think, police details, I think, work well in clubs. I have a lot of people that I represent that use them even voluntarily because it's a deterrent factor. I think a presence, at 1:30 in the morning to help clear crowds from Spruce Street, because whether they're at 7 or any place else, whether you're going to Venda or you're going to a club, chances are you're probably parking somewhere on Spruce Street. And so we know where the people are, we know where the crowds are going to gather. We have to have some sort of police presence, I think, to disperse those. These are just things you're going to have in urban life and city life. You're going to have places that are open late. Boston deals with it, New York deals with it, and Providence has its share of issues. But if everyone worked together, I think you can resolve them.
So you do raise that point, again, of that staffing issue. We do know that police is understaffed in comparison to, say, fire. I mean, is it purely a staffing issue? Is it a money issue? Is it literally the ability to put boots on the ground when they're needed?
I mean, I can't profess to be an expert. Everything in this city is a money issue and a staffing issue. It's part of the challenges of what we have economically in Providence. But I don't think the solution is simply to say, well, we're going to just put every place out of business that's open late. I don't think that's what anybody wants. And, I think there's been a lot of talk about soft closings that even keep people open till 3, so that when you stop serving liquor at 1, people aren't rushing out the door at 1:30, or 2. You sort of have that slow rolling exit, and I think, I don't mean to speak for anyone in the police department. I think there are those that are in favor of trying to do that. They do that when places close for the festivals in the summer. They get a lot of the clubs on Elmwood and Broad Street to close, and in exchange for closing on the days of the festivals, they get some 5 nights that they close at 3 a.m., and there usually are not issues on those nights, but they usually will have a detail. There's a heightened sense of what's going on, and people tend to behave. I represent a lot of places that are open. If I can be helpful in doing that, that's fine. But as long as there's this conflict and war between establishments and public safety, the Board of Licenses and the DVR, we'll keep winning cases until the law changes. But we're happy to work together as sort of an element of the business community so that we can make sure people are safe.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come in and walk us through, again, what the Department of Business Regulation had said this morning in their decision. And just to revisit it, again, you had mentioned that the owner had already been looking at the possibility of selling or moving on or looking at a different construct. Because of those constraints that DBR had put with their decision, had it not even put those on it, would it have been a different scenario if they could have still stayed open till 2 with a little bit less constrictions?
No, like I said, if they would just say you can open till 2 and you can have entertainment, I don't believe this owner would open. He doesn't have faith in the process, and
Okay.
and why would he have faith in the process? He broke the rules and he should be punished. But the decision that was read in this case at the board was just a new level of manufacturing law that doesn't exist. In fact, they read the law that exists and then they just did something completely contrary to it. So he doesn't have faith in the process, and I know that's the result that neighbors up there want, and I'm sure they'll be happy to hear that he's going to move on and go someplace else. That's if he can sell his business. If he can't sell his business and he can't sell his license, and we are ultimately successful in the defense of the case, he'll reopen and he'll operate there. Not his preference, obviously. He's not going to just walk away from his investment. But if there's no one to buy the business, then he will reopen. Because I don't think that this case results in an 11 o'clock in perpetuity. You'll probably see an extended suspension of the BX, I would figure. But I don't think it's even a case where you would revoke the BX. I don't think that would be upheld under the case law. And our option now, too, is we can go to Superior Court and we can appeal the decision of the director on the stay if we were so inclined to do it. I don't know that that's something we are planning to do. Certainly, if he was going to open tomorrow, I would probably do that. But I think, we would accept these conditions for now, and then we'll go forward with the full appeal.
Okay, so that's my question, that next step, again, if he doesn't find that buyer, decides that, again, he has to work with what he's given, what's the next step from the legal perspective then, seeing what came from the DVR today? What, as your lawyer, would you have to take?
Yeah, so it's a de novo hearing. So the department pays no deference at all to the board decision after the stay hearing is conducted. So we have a full new trial that happens. Sometimes we stipulate to what the record is below to save everyone the time. Other times we do the hearing again. And sometimes when we win the stay, sometimes that'll open up negotiation, because if the hearing officer says, I find there's a substantial likelihood of success on the merits, it's unusual to then see a total reversal in a full hearing. Sometimes new information comes up and that happens, but most often it doesn't. So I'm always, in all these cases where there have been appeals, I've always reached out with a willingness to come to an agreement on what the appropriate penalty would be in a case. And I'll do that now. I'll call the solicitor's office and say, can we talk about how we might be able to resolve it? And then if we can't, we have a new hearing. We go forward, and the DBR can keep it the way it is, or they can input their entirely own penalty in the case.
Well, I appreciate your taking the time to come down, because I think folks were interested to hear about the fate of Club 7 moving forward. So, Attorney Nick Hemond, thank you for taking the time to come in today. And thank you for watching us here on GoLocal Live. We'll be back tomorrow with more news, lifestyle, politics, and more. But of course, catch us on GoLocalProv.com. Find us on Facebook, and we'll see you tomorrow. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Engel.